What's up, y'all? Welcome in to another edition of DNVR Rams Live, presented by our friends at Branded Bills. Head to brandedbills.com, use that code BBDNVR for 15% off of your first order. We've got an emergency podcast live from my home studio Sunday afternoon about 3 p.m. Mountain Time. Like a lot of you, planned on watching NFL football this afternoon. Had to hit the pause button, hit record on the afternoon action, because Jay Norvell is out as the head coach at Colorado State. I broke the news. I do appreciate that a couple of the national guys gave me credit after the fact. It's not the end of the world when you don't get credit. That's not necessarily what you do this for, but it is nice to see local reporting acknowledged by the big guys, if you will. This is one of many examples, I would say, why you should follow local reporting. I think CSU fans have an awesome newspaper source in Kevin Lytle, and obviously I do what I can to keep everybody informed and give my thoughts on everything that's happening in the Ram world. I'm still going to go live tomorrow afternoon where I'll give some takeaways from the Hawaii game. I'll also react to, I should say, what we learn from the press conference we'll have with CSU's athletic director, John Weber, tomorrow at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. The firing has been confirmed by CSU at this point. Tyson Summers will be the interim head coach for the rest of the season. I think he makes the most sense based on his experience. Previously was the head coach at Georgia State. I wanted to say Georgia Southern. I think it's Georgia State. Maybe it was Georgia Southern. It was, after his time as the defensive coordinator under Mike Bobo at CSU, which was a short-lived stint. I will say the timing of the firing is maybe a little bit surprising to me. I don't really know, as far as a competitive advantage, if there's going to be much gained. I mean, I will say it does feel like a PR win, just in the sense that it maybe calms the masses down a little bit, maybe increases your chances of having better crowds for some of these home games. The tide had certainly turned at this point. I think there was no going back. The fans had firmly given up on the tenure. And while I have a really solid relationship with Jay Norvell, this isn't going to be, me jumping for joy or anything like that. I have a lot of respect for him. He was great to me access-wise, came on the show a bunch of times, and I'm appreciative of that. I've been around football coaches that don't treat anybody with respect. And he certainly is a good dude, at least in my experience. Everybody's going to have their own, individual experiences with people, and relationships are complicated. I get all that. But I just think at this point, this was really the only move that was going to happen, whether it was this weekend, whether it was a week from now, whether it was a month from now. The writing was on the wall. This was not working with Jay Norvell. 2-5 start to the year, 18-26 over his 3.5 seasons as the head coach. Highs were obviously beating Boise State for the first time in program history back in 2023. I will still always be stoked about rivalry wins. So beating Air Force in the Springs for the first time since 2002, beating Wyoming last year, beating both of them in the same season for the first time in a decade. Those were great moments. Those were definitely the highs under him. But despite what he did from a relationship standpoint, I think he did a really good job repairing relationships with the alumni, which was not the football alumni, I should say, former players. That was definitely not something that was emphasized as far as recruiting goes. I think he did great stuff there. But while you can point to things like bad portal luck, bad injury luck this season, it really has been unlike anything I can remember in a while. What it really comes down to is there just wasn't enough growth from year 2 to year 4. still felt like CSU still struggled with the same lack of discipline, too many penalties, turnovers have been an issue. Obviously, the offense as a whole has just been a mess this year. And, you fired Freddie Banks last year, the defensive coordinator going into the bowl game, really threw him under the bus, if we're being real, backed over him a couple of times in the process. There really wasn't anybody else to blame. You'd given up the play calling duties. You're halfway through year 4. At some point, the buck stops with him. And at this point of his tenure, this far into the process, it just was not good enough. It really is that simple. Like, I can say a lot of things about the guy. I think he's a good dude. I do respect him. But this is a results business. And with what CSU is committing to athletics right now, really exhausting all possible resources at the hope of being a championship contending program, they've been unapologetic with that, very public about the expectations for CSU athletics moving forward. It just is not what it was under Joe Parker. If Joe was still in town, I don't know if this move would happen. Again, like, from a competitive standpoint, I think you can argue whether it's going to do a whole lot, over these last final games. You never know. I mean, you see some pretty crazy things with interim coaches every now and then. What's happening at UCLA under Tim Skipper, and we'll talk about him a little bit later on, is definitely the hope, I guess, if you're CSU. But what it comes down to is the results just weren't there, especially in the games that matter most. And to me, the demise really is the 2024 Rocky Mountain Showdown. I think that was probably the final nail as far as the majority of the fans went. They just completely laid an egg in the first, home game against CU since '96. It was a massive national audience. And after everything that had already happened in 2023, blowing that game in Boulder, they should have won. Then really doing the same thing against Hawaii and UNLV. To have that September and then have the season fizzle out the way that it did, you did some things well objectively in the conference slate, but you still pissed down your leg when you had an opportunity to, play your way into a conference championship. That game in Fresno was super frustrating. And then, the cherry on top was obviously the bowl game, where you had a really awesome contingent of traveling fans, the most alumni, the most CSU fans that I've ever seen attend a bowl game like that, especially considering it wasn't the Fiesta Bowl or something. It's the Arizona Bowl against Miami of Ohio, but still CSU fans were so starved for a signature moment, for a big postseason win, that they showed up in masses. And it really was a fun experience outside of the game. I mean, being in Tucson and being around everybody, but to just get your teeth kicked in the way that they did, it puts so much pressure on having a hot start in September. And unfortunately for him, September's just proved to be pretty dreadful. 5-11, an overturned call against Northern Colorado, away from being, 4-12 and 0-4 twice in the opening month. They needed to have some style points. They needed to reassure the fans after a disappointing ending last season. And instead, it just kind of felt like they poured gasoline all over the fire. And it wasn't good enough. And I think there are a lot of things you could point to as far as where it all went wrong. They struggled to develop quarterbacks. You come in thinking that Clay Millen is going to be the guy. That obviously proves to not be the case. They make the switch to BFN, and he kind of regressed over the years. I still think he's a guy who athletically has a very high ceiling. In the right circumstance, could probably be a pretty good player at this level. But they changed the schemes around multiple times. That jacked him around. I think the receiver position and it basically being a revolving door didn't help. They brought a lot of really talented guys into the program, but outside of Torrey, they had a really difficult time hanging on to them. And that's going to be a factor probably for the next coach too. I mean, that's just kind of the reality of being a group of 5 coach in 2025. You're going to have talent poached. You have to figure out how to adjust. And once we saw guys like, Justice Ross Simmons and Lewis Brown, and then even to a lesser extent, Caleb Goody, I mean, you certainly could use him this year. Once those guys started going out the door, we just saw the offense really become pretty stagnant. And I warned people that while I think the quarterback change was justified based on Braden's struggles this year, that it wasn't going to be this magic fix that you switch it and boom, everything's solved. They just never really developed an offensive identity. And one of the things that I think stands out to me, if you listen to any of the post-game presser last night, Jay Norvell talked about how they tried to do a lot of different stuff defensively. And I understand it to an extent because of all the injuries that you've had. You've been decimated on that side of the ball. That's fair. But even with them being dramatically different schematically than what Fresno was throwing at you, I understand that what the offense is trying to run is going to dictate what you're doing to an extent. To me, that kind of summed up what these last couple years have been in a nutshell, which is they've overthought a lot of things. And instead of really trying to establish your own identity, instead of trying to impose your will, being the team who everybody else has to dictate their game around, it felt like we were trying to be chameleons as a program and constantly changing the scheme based on the matchup. You get in your head about a tough matchup against Texas and you just completely throw your offense out the book at that point. And they did establish some things in the run game last year. And I think it probably did end up being a switch that allowed them to have a little bit more success and win a few games that they maybe would not have been able to, eke out had they not made that switch. But in the games that mattered most, far too frequently, this team just crumbled under the pressure. And last night was a perfect example of that. You have a record-setting crowd, awesome turnout for homecoming. The students, like they have now for a couple of years, showed up in droves. I mean, their commitment is awesome. And if you are a student watching, I hope you know how much people like me appreciate it, because for years that was not the case. It was like pulling teeth to get the undergrads to come. The alumni, they're spending their hard-earned money. They're investing their time. There's a lot of good things to do on a Saturday in Colorado. And I think that kind of comes down to part of why you had to make this move is at some point the support was just not going to continue, because you can't keep having the same results over and over again and expect people to stay on board. And I think at this point, this was a move to kind of satisfy the alumni and, hopefully generate some excitement and hope again for the program. There's a lot riding on this move to the Pac-12. The last thing you wanted to have happen is it to be a lame duck situation, or even worse, have it be a situation where the fans are just completely out and not invested in what's going to be a pivotal year for the program and in the future. I mean, it's never been more important for CSU to get this next hire right. And I'll throw out a couple of names. I still have to do a bunch of research in terms of trying to find some of those hidden gem type coaches and really getting an informed opinion. This is going to be kind of my instant reaction. I mean, I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought about it a few times over the last couple of weeks, but I'll throw some names out that I think would make sense to me. I'll react to some of your questions and comments. I know we haven't gotten to everything. I do appreciate everybody rocking with us live on YouTube. If you wouldn't mind giving us a thumbs up, saying what's up in the Toyota chat, please keep it civil if you would not mind. If you're listening later on, if you wouldn't mind, giving us a shout on Spotify, Apple, whatever you consume us on, it would certainly be appreciated. Crazy weekend, though. Talk about a crazy weekend. I was with my family who are in town. I was over at my brother's place. We're all watching the Minnesota Vikings and, eating food and getting ready for the Broncos game. And all of a sudden, this comes crashing in. And I think, again, the fact that they fired him is not surprising. The timing of it is maybe a little bit surprising. I probably would have guessed that he had gotten, or that he would have gotten, one more week just with Wyoming coming up. But who knows? Maybe this will provide a spark in that locker room. Tyson Summers, in my experience this year, we actually played an interview with him on the show on Friday. If you missed that, if you want to kind of get to know the interim head coach a little bit, it's about 10 minutes of Kevin and Lytle and I picking his brain. Go check that out. But this is a pivotal time, and CSU cannot afford to get this next hire wrong, because with the direction of college football, the gap between the haves and the have-nots widening more and more by the year, it's never been more important to be relevant, and the importance of succeeding has never been more significant for this program, especially with what they're currently spending on athletics. I mean, you don't build Canvas Stadium, you don't bet on yourself and make the move to the new Pac-12 with aspirations of being a middle of the pack type program. And even if they were able to skank out a 6-6 season this year, which is possible, as bad as it's looked, the Mountain West just isn't good this year. Nobody plays defense. It's brutal. There is a somewhat realistic, somewhat plausible scenario in which you could do that. But I mean, that wouldn't be enough. We had John Weber on the show in August, and he talked about, needing to capitalize off of what they had done and striving for more, and just very clearly that was not the case. So let me shout out a couple of partners. We'll keep this rolling. Again, appreciate everybody rocking with us in the Toyota chat, but we'll keep this going. Life is easy to get you worked up. I mean, it just happens. I'm sure a lot of folks were feeling pretty worked up on their way to the parking lots after last night's performance. Between work struggles and personal life struggles and being a CSU fan struggles, it's just easy to get worked up. Rarely does it ever help you, though, to lose your cool. And that's why our friends at Coors Light encourage you to choose chill, to rise above, to do the little things that put you in that chill state of mind. Maybe you got to go for a walk. I think I'm going to have to take my pup Indy for a walk after this, just because he senses my tension right now, my anxiety. Obviously, it's kind of nerve-wracking when you're trying to break news like this and figure out what comes next. Make sure you choose chill, rise above, and then when you do, crack open an ice cold Coors Light. Coors Light is cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for a smooth finish. Make the most of the times you choose to chill. Choose Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door. Visit CoorsLight.com/DNVR. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. Beer. Trucks have always been a part of Toyota's DNA. For generations, Toyota's built durable legends destined for greatness and perfect for Colorado. It doesn't matter if you live in NoCo like me, if you're in the heart of the city like many of my colleagues, if you're on the western slope, if you're in the mountains, wherever you are, Toyota has a vehicle that's perfect for you. If you want to conquer those off-road trails, if you want to haul the weight of the world, maybe you should check out the Tacoma or the Land Cruiser, both great options. They've got 17 models with all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive. The 4Runner is a classic example of that. 16 hybrid vehicles to choose from, like the Tundra iForce Max hybrid truck. Toyota SUVs take command on the road and on the trail. Toyota is a proud partner of CSU Athletics and the official vehicle of DNVR. Toyota, let's go places. Cool. Appreciate everybody in the Toyota chat again. I'm going to talk about what we know at this point. Again, John Weber, the athletic director, will hold a press conference. That'll be at 11 a.m. Mountain Time tomorrow. So much to be found out over the next 24 hours, and we will react to that as it comes. This was a statement that was released via CSU Athletics. This is from John Weber. Jay is a leader of the highest character who cares deeply about developing his players as athletes, students, and young men. My admiration for Jay and appreciation for his integrity make this decision that much more difficult. Jay has made this program better during his tenure at CSU. On behalf of the entire Ram family, I sincerely thank Jay for the strong foundation he has laid for our football program. However, as we prepare to join the Pac-12 conference next year, we need to position our program to compete at the highest level. While we've seen progress, a change in leadership is necessary to achieve the sustained excellence our program requires. We are continuing to invest and work hard to ensure that the football program and the next head coach have the resources needed to capitalize on this historic opportunity. I mean, you look at this job, and I know that there will always be trolls and cynics, and you know, I'll get crap from other Mountain West teams and Wyoming and CU fans and all that. I get it. But this is an attractive gig, and it is an attractive gig because CSU is committed to winning. This is a place where the fan support is there, the facilities are there, the staff resources are there, the access to nutrition and little things like that, mental health, academics. There's no resource spared when it comes to CSU and what they are striving to do athletically. The results, unfortunately, for a variety of factors, have not been there even since the increased commitment, which started about a decade ago. I mean, really before that, basically once the wheels went in motion to build the on-campus stadium. But this is a place where, if you are a football coach, that the school is going to give you everything that they realistically possibly can to try and compete at the highest level. And that's just not the case everywhere. There are a lot of coaches who are doing some serious heavy lifting. And when you're at a place, I mean, Jay Norvell at Nevada was a great example of this. When you're at a place like that, you look at CSU and think to yourself, man, look what I'm doing here. Imagine what I could do if I had all of that. And I just think when you look at everything they have going for them, it's a great campus. It's a great university. Fort Collins is an incredible place to live. There's so much going right for this program that if you can get the right hire in here, I mean, I think it's a sleeping giant. It's obviously a cliche. It gets used a lot, but what CSU football can be is something special. And if they get this right, I just think that we're going to see this program reach heights that we haven't seen, certainly since Sonny, and hopefully even, accomplishments that are exceeding what Sonny did. I mean, that's the hope, right? We can dream big, make the playoff. You have access if you go, 11-1, if you win a conference championship. There's no reason to think that this is a bad gig or that it won't be attractive. Like, I just think that people that say that aren't factoring in everything that goes into all this. And when you look at the institutional support, the fan support, the resources, I mean, everything else, just the fact that Fort Collins is a kick-ass place to live. You don't have to live in the middle of nowhere or, a place where you feel like you're going to get mugged at night or something like that. I mean, Bronco Mendenhall left New Mexico more or less because his family didn't feel safe in Albuquerque. It's not that type of situation. No disrespect intended towards Albuquerque. All my peeps in New Mexico got much love for you. I enjoy going down there. I'm going to miss the food with New Mexico not being in the Pac-12. But I just mean it really is a great gig. And under the right circumstances, this could be something special. The thing is, you're running out of time. You did the right thing in building Campus Stadium, and you have done nothing to capitalize on it since that moment. Sure, Jay Norvell came in and stabilized some things to an extent. Likely going to be significant roster turnover moving forward, so we'll see what happens with all of that. But you missed a really pivotal window there to capitalize when you had some positive momentum post Jim McElwain. And a lot like Norvell, I think Bobo had some bad luck and all that. Adazio was just a train wreck that never made sense from the start. But I can't fault CSU with their process with these last couple of hires. And I think that's important to remember. I think we get fixated on things like, do they have CSU ties? And then that should be something that's considered. I think it's a bonus when you're able to have that. I don't think it should be one of the most important factors in all of this. You need to find somebody who can win, just point blank period. I would really love to see somebody who's been able to do more or do more with less, maybe somebody who's had a ton of success at the FCS ranks, fellow G5 school, something like that. I do think there are some intriguing options as far as P4 coordinators go, and we'll get into some of those guys as well. But I just want to find somebody that wins. And if they win so much that they happen to get poached by another school, well, guess what? That means CSU's in a far better position than they are right now. And the cold, hard truth is that Jim McElwain, I believe, is the only coach that was ever hired away from CSU. Even Sonny got fired. Bobo got fired. Dazio obviously got fired. And now Jay Norvell got fired too. You worry about loyalty down the line. You just find somebody who can win. And, it's never ideal if it becomes a revolving door situation. You don't want to become Utah State basketball. Certainly would like to have some stability and continuity there. That's one of the reasons I preached patience these last couple of years. But at the end of the day, you just got to find somebody that can win. And I think there are some very intriguing candidates. So kind of off of the top of my head here, I put together just a little short list with some guys that make sense. I didn't have a chance to do a deep dive into their bios and throw out all the facts about them. So kind of bear with me there. We'll go more in depth on some of these guys tomorrow, I'm sure. But my number one candidate just off the top would be Clint Kubiak. He is the Seattle Seahawks offensive coordinator. I don't know how realistic of a target he truly would be. I would imagine that he would take an interview, given that he's an alum. He played at CSU. I'm sure there would be some interest there. I also think that realistically, with the success that he's having in Seattle, I don't know how far off he is from becoming an NFL head coach. And I think that being an NFL head coach, not even for like status and like being in the pros of college football is incredible. It's just a way harder gig. There's so much about being a coach that has nothing to do with coaching. You have to be a politician. Recruiting is such a major factor. I do think that some of the changes that are coming to the portal, that are coming to the recruiting calendar, where it's going to be less of a free for all and more in line with like structured NFL free agency, essentially. I do think that makes it a little bit more attractive because it's just less chaotic in that sense. But I think Clint Kubiak is a guy who would really generate a ton of excitement. I think he's an offensive genius. Obviously, being Gary Kubiak's son, he's been around football his entire life. I think he would have a lot of people in his corner. I think he would have access to filling out a pretty incredible staff, which is also something that I think you need to consider in all of this. It's not just about your head coach. The rest of your staff matters as much, if not even more. I mean, depending on how much you're willing to empower them. I do hope we see more delegation. If you hire someone like Clint Kubiak, I would assume that he's going to call the plays. I will admit to you guys that I'm not crazy about that. That's not just a Jay Norvell thing. I just think in principle, it's better to have somebody who can be more of a CEO type, who can look at the game in a big picture sense, who's not going to be, buried in the play sheet. That said, I think most coaches these days, you look at the NFL, the Sean Paytons of the world, the Sean McVays, like that you'd have to rip the play sheet out of their cold, dead hands. I get that all football coaches have ego. A lot of these guys, they coach their way up the ranks by calling plays, and because of that, they don't want to give up that control. I wouldn't hate that, though. I also will say that while really my top couple guys are offensive-minded, Clint Kubiak, I threw out Colin Klein, the Texas A&M offensive coordinator, would be my number one choice as far as up-and-coming coaches go. He's a Loveland native, played at a really high level at Kansas State, coached at Kansas State, and recruited Colorado pretty heavily, so he already has those regional ties and familiarity as far as local hires go, or guys with local ties. I think he would be a big move. Again, maybe he has aspirations of being somewhere bigger down the line, but if that proves to be the case, then that means he's probably having a lot of success here. At this point, I would take that. I just think he is somebody who would generate a lot of excitement. One, because he's a younger candidate, but two, just because some of the stuff he's doing offensively at Texas A&M, it's really fun. And I just think it's a hire that would be exciting for CSU. Their quarterback has had some struggles this year, but Colin Klein is a guy, you look at his resume between A&M, Kansas State, I think he'd be a guy that makes a lot of sense. I'm completely biased on this one, but I do think that realistically he makes a lot of sense based on the success he's having. Tim Skipper, the UCLA interim head coach, he was at CSU, was the associate head coach under Jim McElwain, has now had two very successful stints as an interim guy, multiple times with Fresno State. Now what he has done at UCLA is incredible. I know Jerry Neuheisel gets all of the credit, and he's doing an awesome job. I mean, their offense does look night and day. It's honestly so starkly different. You have to think to yourself, like, what was Deshaun Foster doing? I mean, what were you doing in practice that it looks this different? But Skip is a guy who's been around the game for a long time. He's a veteran coach. He's not going to be the splashy PR win that some of these other guys would be, but I think he is a very solid football coach who has been around a lot of successful programs and is overdue for a head coaching opportunity. And now that he is having the success that he is at UCLA, you're able to sell that in a way that you would not have been able to. I mean, I would have thrown his name out just based on his CSU ties and what I had seen from him at Fresno State. I mean, you got to remember, it was Tim Skipper's team that prevented CSU from going to the conference championship last year. I mean, he's got a really solid resume. It's just not one of those that's going to be like the splash hire that generates a bunch of clicks and engagement. But you want to know what? some of that stuff, that flash is a little bit overrated. Give me a ball coach that can win. That's what I want. I'm going to throw out a couple of other names. Keep the questions, comments rolling in the Toyota chat. Let me shout out a couple of other partners, and I'll give you some more names to keep an eye on here. Whether you need snapbacks, truckers, fitteds, beanies, or tees, Branded Bills has you covered with performance and style. If you're looking for some gear to make your brand stand apart from the crowd, Branded Bills has you covered with the best custom headwear. Start your order. Their dedicated team will help you create the exact custom apparel you need. They've got a partnership with CSU as part of their campus collection. If you head to brandedbills.com, you can use that code BBDNVR for 15% off your first order. Hey, Colorado. Stop by your local Dick's Sporting Goods for the hottest apparel and footwear from top brands like Nike, Adidas, Hoka, DNVR, and more. Plus, score the latest equipment for baseball, football, soccer, basketball, golf, all your tailgating essentials. If you find a lower price, their price match or their best price guarantee, they'll match it. Get your gear free curbside with pickup at your nearest store. Easy shipping from Dicks.com. Every season starts at Dick's. It's still pretty crazy that we have partnered with Dick's Sporting Goods. Every time I get to do that read, it's a little bit surreal to me. We've got some names being thrown out in the Toyota chat that I would like to address here. Kyle says, what about the University of Northern Colorado head coach? That's Ed Lamb. He's doing quite the impressive job. Their turnaround this year is pretty insane. They're a handful of plays away from being like 6-1. Something close to that. I mean, they've competitively been night and day from what we had seen from that program for a long time. I mean, I think he's somebody that you would at least have to consider, just given his success. He's been at BYU too, so he's been at a higher level program, been at the FCS ranks. He, just based on his background, would be somebody that would be intriguing to me. I don't know how appealing this job would be to him though, just because I've had Brady Hole on the show before, and he obviously knows him really well. Pretty much the Bears insider. Part of the reason that Ed Lamb took that job at Northern Colorado in the first place is he kind of wanted a low stakes environment. He has a son with pretty severe autism, and he wanted stability. He wanted somewhere, where the lights weren't as bright, where he could do what he loves, which is coaching. But this isn't an easy gig, guys. I mean, the history says that the likelihood of all this is that it's going to be closer to what we've seen over the last 10 years than, under Sonny Lubick. That, as of now, is more or less been an outlier. But we still, because we saw what Sonny could do, have really high expectations, maybe even borderline unrealistic at times. At the same time, you see what some of these other schools are able to do, and you just think to yourself, well, why can't it be CSU with everything that we have invested in athletics, with everything this university in town have to offer? But I mean, Ed Lamb is somebody you could consider. People throwing out Billy Napier. He was an OC at CSU for a year. Everything I've ever been told behind the scenes is that Billy hated living in Fort Collins. It was part of why he left in the first place. Just, he's a Southern guy through and through. That's where he wants to be. Maybe, now that he's out at Florida, he'd reconsider. I don't know. I mean, it's a different gig. That was still when they were at Hughes. You're moving to the Pac-12, so you could consider him. I do think he is a good football coach who was at another place where the expectations are probably unrealistic. Jerry Neuheisel, I guess you have to throw him out just because he's the fun name these days. If UCLA were to move on from him, maybe you could get Skipper and Neuheisel as a package deal. Who knows? But what they're doing offensively is pretty exciting. If you were going to go the poaching route, which CSU did with Norvell, I love what Jason X building out of New Mexico. I'd be a little bit heartbroken for UNM if they had a coach poached from them within the league for the second year in a row. That'd be a tough pill to swallow. I think the swagger, though, that program has displayed, they've got a fun vibe going. Clearly a guy who has been able to have success with less. That is something that's intriguing to me. Brent Vigen, the Montana State head coach, another guy. He was at Wyoming for a long time. So, I mean, he's got the Mountain West experience, but he has kind of been able to build that program up to heights that had never been before or never reached before. Tired folks, bear with me. He's somebody, again, maybe not the PR win, but I think he's somebody kind of like the Sonny Lubick mold, defensive minded, succeeded at small place, small town roots. I like that as much as I was intrigued by Bobo, and I think he was an offensive genius. I think, McElwain and his background made sense too. I'm intrigued by the possibility of leaning on a defensive minded guy who has been able to have success in this region of the country and understands, kind of what this job is going to be. Everybody's going to throw out Tony Alford. I'm exhausted with it. Maybe this is the time that they pick him. He's been passed over for the job like 4 separate times. I don't know Tony personally. I've heard a lot of good things about him. I've heard that he's a tremendous recruiter. I also admittedly am highly skeptical of somebody who's never even been a play caller at this point in his career. Why hasn't he been elevated if he is this brilliant coach? And that could frankly be unfair of me. It very well could be. And maybe he comes in and kills it. Given that he's a former player, that would be awesome to see. I'd be all about that. I also just feel like he's the name everybody throws out because he played at CSU. And I don't know if the resume necessarily, outside of the fact that he's just been a guy who's been at big programs, but as being the running backs coach at Michigan and Ohio State, does that translate to being the head coach of a group of 5 program? I don't know. Maybe it could, maybe it couldn't. He's not a candidate that's very high up on the list for me. I understand why the fans would be stoked about him. I just think you have more proven options on the table, and given the importance of this hire, that feels like a pretty big gamble to me. And I'd say the same thing about like Jerry Neuheisel, some of these other names I'm throwing out. To be honest, I just know that Alford is going to be a very popular name on Ram Nation and all that. Brian Harsin of Cal, I know his time at Auburn soured him with a lot of people, and that's fair. I also think that dude's a winner, and if he could do at CSU what he did at Boise State, I think the fans would sign up for it in a heartbeat. Maybe don't let him hire the receptionist. Jay Hill, the BYU defensive coordinator, he was somebody who had a lot of success at Weber State over the years. That BYU defense is nasty. He'd be intriguing to me as well. Again, maybe closer to that Brent Vigen mold or Sonny Lubick, although I don't want to, use those types of comparisons too easily. Obviously Sonny is the standard. I just mean somebody who comes from a defensive background, has had experience and the mountain time zone, stuff like that. Obviously what Sonny did at Miami was big time as well. Matt Lubick is a name you'll see a lot. I will say I would be on board with that. I just wonder how realistic it is. Obviously he has some health stuff given his cancer history, and that's really unfortunate. It's great to see him coaching. Love to see that. But I've always heard behind the scenes that Sonny does not want that, would not bless it, doesn't want the pressure and the expectations that would come with his son taking over this job. I mean, it's basically impossible shoes to fill, and I understand that. I would be very intrigued by the possibility of Lubick coming over as the offensive coordinator, though. Clay Helton, Western Kentucky head coach, I've seen thrown out a lot. I know he's had some success, but doesn't do a ton for me. Chris Kiffin, is another guy that played at CSU. Lane Kiffin's brother, has some NFL experience as well. So comes from a diverse background as far as his coaching experience goes. Another guy though that doesn't really have hardly any experience above being like a position coach and an analyst. And just given how important this hire is, I think that you have to go with somebody a little bit more proven. Lamar says, what's your beef with Sam Pittman? There's already buzz surrounding him in CSU from national outlets. Sure. I mean, he's the guy I think could be interesting, maybe. I will say this, take any of those lists from the national outlets with a grain of salt, because those come directly from agents trying to get their guys floated. I've been burned by stuff with that before. Some interviews even mean nothing. Just keep all of that in mind over these next couple of weeks. Who knows how long this process is going to draw out. We might not know who the next coach is going to be until, like December. But just keep all of that in mind. Some of these names that are going to get thrown out are either just going to be the lazy, obvious names like Alford, or the names that are agenda driven by agents and frankly, a lot of those national scoops guys, that's basically what they do. They scratch the agents' backs, the agents scratch their backs for the little scoops. It's not a whole lot of substance to what they're doing, but they're going to throw those names out when the agents snap their fingers. Anthony says, could Summers win the job if he performs well? Would he want it? I mean, I'm sure he'd want it. Just moved his family across the country. He's got young kids. Like, he'd love the opportunity to be a head coach again. Yeah, he'd certainly want it. How exciting that would be, how sellable to the fans that would be, I think that's debatable. I don't know how much it makes sense. I guess he's not necessarily a Norvell guy. It's his first year here, but I think he'd have to do a pretty insane job, like run the table, for that to even be a realistic possibility. We'll see. Josh says, for reference, On3 has put Shannon Dawson on the list for CSU. He's probably another Napier who doesn't want to leave the South. There's just so many factors that you have to consider in all of this, like realistically, what are the odds of them moving across the country? What are their ties to this part of the region? What's their family situation like? There's just so many things that we don't necessarily factor into the mix when we're throwing names on the board. That's all I've got as far as like my initial list goes. We'll talk about this a ton, obviously, over the next couple of weeks. Just some final thoughts here. CSU ties are a bonus. They are not a must for me. This is the most important hire since Sonny Lubick. This is also the most appealing this job has been in a long time, given what CSU commits to athletics. You cannot afford to miss on this hire. With the direction that college football is heading, it's never been more important to be relevant, and you do that by winning. And I'm not talking 6-6, 7-5. I'm talking doing things like what Boise State's done, and even UNLV, as fraudulent as I think their record is, like what they've been able to do these last couple of years from a national perception standpoint has been incredible. And that is what you need to do. This is a good gig. CSU's committed to winning. The resources are there. The fan commitment is there. Ram fans are desperate. They're starving for a winner. And God, man, if you get somebody in here that does it right, the support that he's going to have, you'll be a legend. I just want to see the Rams get some bang for their buck, because I keep talking about coaches that are appealing that have done more with less. And I think CSU's been a perfect example of a school that does less with more. And I'm sick of it. It's just something that's got to change. Thank you for listening to the DNVR Rams podcast presented by Branded Bills. Thank you to our incredible producer, Yaya, for dropping everything and making this happen. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. Head to brandedbills.com. Use that code BBDNVR for 15% off your first order. Much love, y'all. Always proud to be. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor. We all silly like the mayor.